Welcome into the show today. Thank you for making this podcast a part of your day, where this podcast is 100% honest 100% of the time. And let me just prove it to you. Someone just texted my wife that they're pregnant, and my first thought was you should send back congrats on the sex. Can you imagine a woman sending that to another woman? Hey, congrats on the sex. It sounds kind of funny. It's something guys to say to another guy, but of course the women, they say to, oh my gosh, so congratulations, can't wait to meet that little guy or girl. Oh my gosh, I'm so happy for you guys. Guys, congrats on the sex. Podcast is 100% honest 100% of the time. All right, the Minnesota Vikings face off in their first playoff game in a few years against the Los Angeles Rams on Monday Night Football in Arizona. And as the game gets closer, stories are coming out, and I didn't do a podcast yesterday, so there's stories from yesterday that I did not get to. And the reason why I don't do a podcast for every single day of the week is because I got to take a day off. Jesus says to take a stab, take a break, take a day off, and there's one day throughout the week that I will not podcast. I'll podcast 6 of the 7, but that's why I podcast 6 of the 7 and not 7 out of 7, because I got a day for Jesus. Got to reserve a day for Jesus to rest and reset. All right, Minnesota Vikings. They were favored the last time I checked against the Los Angeles Rams in Arizona. And actually, what's interesting is that the Minnesota Vikings were favored by 1 point against the Rams when the game was originally supposed to be played in Los Angeles. And then when the game moved to Arizona, the Minnesota Vikings line went up to 2.5. And right now it still stands at 2.5 on DraftKings. So the Minnesota Vikings against the red hot Los Angeles Rams that have won a lot of games in a row, besides their last one, which was a game where they rested their starters and played nobody, have been hot. Before their last game, they've won 5 games in a row. And since starting the season 1-4, they finished the season on a hot streak. And they are legitimate playoff contenders and a legitimate opponent for the Minnesota Vikings to defeat. The Rams 1-4 finished the season 10-7 and are a definite opponent that strikes fear in the Minnesota Vikings because of a Matthew Stafford, because of a Puka Nacua, because of a Cooper Kupp, and because of a Kyren Williams. The Rams have offensive threats. And based on how Sam Darnold performed against the Lions, is putting a lot of doubt and fear in Minnesota Vikings fans' eyes, maybe even the Minnesota Vikings organization, and people that are predicting the Minnesota Vikings Los Angeles Rams game. I just saw a story come out right now on bringmethenews.com. The only NFL Network analyst that picked the Minnesota Vikings to beat the Rams was Colleen Wolfe. So Kurt Warner picked the LA Rams. Rich Gannon picked the LA Rams. Mooch picked the LA Rams. Kyle picked the LA Rams. Gerald picked the LA Rams. So there's a lot of people that are back in the red-hot LA Rams, and I think a lot of this doubt is because of how Sam Darnold performed in the last game of the regular season against the Detroit Lions. You know, what's so funny is how much our past dictates how much people believe in us in the future. Meaning, Darnold, all season long, he's been spectacular. 35 touchdowns, 12 picks. You know, he had a great start to the season. Vikings started out 5-0. It goes through a little dip mid-season. Vikings are still winning football games. And then at the end of the season, he finishes with 18 touchdowns, 2 picks in the final few weeks of the year, just on an insane trajectory, putting himself in the top 3 MVP conversation. He has one bad game against the Detroit Lions in a stressful atmosphere. A guy that's never played in a playoff game before finally has a playoff game experience in a regular season game against the Lions, and he plays poorly, and now everyone's jumped off the bandwagon, including perhaps the Minnesota Vikings. This game versus the Rams largely dictates how much money Darnold will get this offseason if the Minnesota Vikings put the franchise tag on Darnold, or if they want to resign him to a multi-year contract. It's crazy how well Darnold played this year and how quickly we are to jump off the bandwagon because he had one bad outing against the Lions. 35 touchdowns, 12 picks. He had insane numbers this season in the NFL. And now that he played one bad game, everyone's like, oh, here's the Darnold from the Jets. Here's the Darnold from the Panthers. This guy stinks. And there are a lot of doubters facing the Minnesota Vikings right now. And I get it. The past largely dictates how much people believe in you because you are what you prove yourself to be. And in the first 6 seasons of Darnold's career, he proved himself to be a bust as a top 3 NFL draft pick. And he's got one great season for the Vikings, plays poorly week 18, and now everyone's like, uh-oh. Are we back to Jets Darnold? Are we back to a guy that stinks? Are we back to a guy that's going to choke in the big moment because he's never had a big moment before? I did a story on Daniel Jones and the other day because the Minnesota Vikings are being very secretive about where Daniel Jones stands in the depth chart. He was activated because the Vikings get a compensatory pick if he leaves this offseason and joins another team. There's value in that, so it made sense to activate him. But then Kevin O'Connell was asked by Kevin Seifert if he was the backup quarterback, QB number 2, and all Kevin O'Connell basically said was he is doing a very good job learning the system. He's way far ahead now than he was when he first joined the organization. Of course he is. Only makes sense. And we're going to do whatever it takes to win. And that last quote, we're going to do whatever it takes to win, caught everybody's attention because now people are wondering if Daniel Jones could get potential reps in the red zone. Ben Lieber is the sideline analyst on the Minnesota Vikings sideline. And he sent out a tweet 23 hours ago saying, with the Minnesota Vikings ranked 28th in the red zone in the last 3 games, is it possible to use Daniel Jones at QB for designated runs? Daniel Jones has proven himself to be a very athletic quarterback. He ran up and down the field versus the Minnesota Vikings a few years ago against Ed Donatell's lethal defensive scheme. I say that sarcastically. And now that Daniel Jones is catching the eyes of the Minnesota Vikings organization, reporters, and fans, it's going to be intriguing to see what role he plays. If he's going to get snaps even with Darnold fully healthy, or if he's only the emergency quarterback tube option if Sam Darnold gets injured. But Daniel Jones was with the reporters just the other day, and the Minnesota Vikings have trained him to say exactly what the Minnesota Vikings want him to say. He said this: I feel like I've picked up a good bit of the offense, he said. I'm potentially backing up Sam Darnold. I think you're always preparing for whatever the situation is. That is a Kevin O'Connell quote in a Daniel Jones body. That's what it is. It's a whole lot of nothing. Of course you feel like you've picked up quite a bit. You've been here for several weeks now. And of course you're preparing for whatever the situation is. What does that quote even mean? But Daniel Jones spoke with reporters and is preparing to play because that's what they all say. Even Brett Rippon, who's a practice squad quarterback, is preparing to play. Another story that came out recently is the motivation for the Los Angeles Rams. And this one comes from Sarah Barshop. Says, the Rams have a screenshot of the interaction between Kevin O'Connell and Dan Campbell where the Lions coach said, I'll see you in 2 weeks, printed out and hung up in the locker room. Talk about locker room bulletin board material. The Los Angeles Rams are using Dan Campbell's comments post-game to Kevin O'Connell, putting it up on the locker room and using it as fuel to defeat the Minnesota Vikings. Now, it's going to be interesting because will the Los Angeles Rams be a motivated, inspired team, win one for the Gipper, win one for LA, or will they be distracted because the wildfires are still mostly out of control and are affecting their families and affecting their region of the United States. So it's going to be interesting because the Rams also have the experience. Stafford's won a Super Bowl. Cooper Kupp's got the Super Bowl. Sean McVay's won a Super Bowl. And you look at the Minnesota Vikings, and for the most part, who has playoff experience? Jefferson played in a playoff game against the Giants. Aaron Jones has playoff experience. Sam Darnold certainly doesn't. For the Minnesota Vikings defensive side of the ball, who's got playoff experience there? So as far as predicting how this game is going to go, it's a very hard prediction because if I'm looking at this game objectively, which I always am, I always look at things objectively. I don't look at things with a bias. And that's why Minnesota Vikings fans call me a hater one day and then call me an amazing fan the next, because I don't look through things with a purple lens. I don't look through things with a Minnesota Vikings biased perspective, thinking they're going to win every single game. And with this game being played in Arizona, the Minnesota Vikings are now favored by an extra 1.5. They're originally favored by 1. Now they're favored by 1.5. And with this game in Arizona, but yet it's still a home game for the Los Angeles Rams, the NFL made a decision to allow season ticket members the first chance to purchase tickets for Monday night's Vikings-Rams game. Season ticket members for the Rams and Arizona Cardinals. Now that's interesting because it says 52,000 tickets were sold to these fans in the 2-hour priority window, and the general public sale now is open at SeatGeek.com. And I looked it up. There are 63,400 total seats at the State Farm Stadium in Arizona, which means there's approximately about 11,000 tickets left to be sold. Now, what makes this interesting is that they allowed season ticket members of the Los Angeles Rams and the Arizona Cardinals to have first priority to these tickets. And if you're a Rams fan, you buy the ticket, you go to the game, you enjoy it, and you root for your team. But if you're an Arizona Cardinals fan and you really don't have a dog in the fight and you're looking to make a profit on this thing, you buy the ticket in that 2-hour window, you find thirsty Minnesota Vikings fans, because there's a lot of them that live in Arizona, and you sell them their ticket. So even though first priority window was given to the Rams and Cardinals, there still could be a lot of Minnesota Vikings fans in attendance if Arizona Cardinals fans wanted to make profit on their ticket. And I'm sure they will. I'm sure that's going to be a part of the story. And there's going to be more Minnesota Vikings fans there in attendance than there would have been in Los Angeles, because the NFL gave first priority window to Arizona Cardinals fans. So how much purple and gold will be in the stadium? Probably much more than we even realize, much more than the NFL even knows, because they sold tickets to Arizona Cardinals fans. And if they don't have a dog in the fight, well, then they're just going to sell their ticket to Minnesota Vikings fans, and they're going to make a bang for their buck. So home field advantage, neutral site field, but technically a home game for the Rams. And the Rams are apparently bussing fans in and bussing fans out so they can still have that home field touch to it. But as far as the prediction goes, wow. I want the Minnesota Vikings to win. Of course. This is a Minnesota Vikings podcast. I've been a Minnesota Vikings fan my entire life. And I do believe in the theory that Sam Darnold got playoff experience before the playoffs actually started, because week 18 against the Detroit Lions was basically a playoff game. And the Rams defense isn't all that spectacular. The Rams offense is something to be concerned about, just because of the offensive weapons that they have available to them and the play caller and all those things. But recently, the Rams offense hasn't put up that many points. They did against the Bills, 44. San Fran, 12. New York, 19. Arizona, 13. They put up 25 against Seattle with their backups. So as good as the Rams offense is, they haven't been putting up that many points recently. However, with that said, I got a bad feeling that the Minnesota Vikings are not going to win this football game. And it's going to be a close, down to the wire football game with Matthew Stafford leading the team down the field to kick a game-winning field goal. Based off experience, based off playmakers available to them. And even though the Minnesota Vikings are favored by 2.5, that's still less than a field goal. So I'm going to pick the Rams to win this football game. And I do that as an objective fan, but I do that with sorrow in my heart because I don't want them to win. I want the Vikings to advance as far as they can go. But I just think that the Rams are more suited for this opportunity against the Minnesota Vikings than the Minnesota Vikings are suited against the Los Angeles Rams. The experience, the playmakers are roughly the same. So I'm going to take Stafford over Sam Darnold. That's basically what it comes down to. So Vikings lose, Rams win 27-24. And the Minnesota Vikings season ends on Monday Night Football. But I'll be there to react to it all. Thank you for making this podcast for every day. Hit that subscribe button. Appreciate you all for making this podcast and listening to it, watching it, doing whatever. Appreciate you all. Have a good day.